Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Paul Ellis and I work for the Centre for Men and Families. And we are at our An Evening with Conversation for the month of March. And it's my pleasure to welcome and invite Ash, as Ash Barker is our guest for this evening. He'll tell you more about himself, but he's a legend of community work and faith development in Australia and internationally in Thailand and where he is now in Birmingham. He'll tell you a lot more about his story, but it's just a real honour to have him here. I'm just offering a dedication for this time together, that it would be a space where we can stop, think about our communities that we find ourselves in, our places, our people, the opportunities for transformation that are amongst us and around us at all times. And I would like to read a poem, and so I'm going to share my screen and hopefully be able to find that poem. That's the right one. Hopefully you can all see that. This is a poem that's been really significant to me, and I shared it actually with Ash, and I think he found it really significant as well. So and he'll tell you maybe more about that context when we talk about that later, but it's Santiago by David Whyte. The road seen, then not seen. The road seen, then not seen. The hillside hiding, then revealing the way you should take. The road dropping away from you as if leaving you to walk on thin air, then catching you, holding you up when you thought you would fall. And the way forward, always in the end, the way that you followed, the way that you came, the way that carried you into your future, that brought you to this place. No matter that it sometimes took your promise from you, no matter that it always had to break your heart along the way, the sense of having walked from far inside yourself out into the revelation, to have risked yourself for something that seemed to stand both inside you and far beyond you, and that called you back in the end to the only road you could follow. Walking as you did in your rags of love and speaking in the voice that by night became a prayer for safe arrival. So that one day you realized that what you wanted had already happened, and long ago, and in the dwelling place in which you lived before you began. And that every step along the way, you had carried the heart and the mind and the promise that first set you off and then drew you on. And that you were more marvelous in your simple wish to find a way than the gilded roofs of any destination you could reach. As if all along you had thought the end point might be a city with golden towers and cheering crowds, and turning a corner at what you thought was the end of the road, you found just a simple reflection and a clear revelation beneath the face looking back, and beneath it another invitation, all in one glimpse, like a person or a place you had sought forever, like a broad field of freedom that beckoned you beyond, like another life and the road still stretching on. That's Santiago by David Whyte. Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully everyone can see me okay. And I'd like to, just welcome Ash and say thanks so much for coming. And do you want to start by telling us a little bit about your yourself and your story. Keep it as long and as short as you wish.
Thanks, Paul. Good to see you alive after all the mountain climbing you've been doing on your bike and in the sunshine. I'm actually here in Winson Green in the city of Birmingham. Lived here for over 10 years now, but my accent is kind of all over the place. I grew up in Melbourne. I kind of have four places that chose me more than me choosing them. And certainly growing up in Dingley, which is kind of southeast Melbourne. Both my parents were British migrants that came to Australia in the 50s and 60s. They met in Australia, not long after the Beatles actually were touring. My mum, who was Scottish, thought my dad, who was from Manchester, sounded like one of the Beatles, and kept saying "Love me do," say "Love me do," and dad used that as a way to get in, really. So if it wasn't for the Beatles, I wouldn't be here. I always say my dad was a carpenter. Of course, there was needed in Australia in the 50s and 60s as the housing boom happened. But my mother's name was Mary. So my dad being a carpenter and my mother's name was Mary, was there any chance I wouldn't have a Messiah complex? But Dingley was a great place to grow up. It was one of those, I mean, I love Richard Raw's work, and Richard's a good friend of ours, and he talks about having a strong container that helps growing up. And I certainly had that, grew up in a very small kind of little suburb of Melbourne. My folks became Christians not long after I was born, probably to cope with me. And it was in lots of ways a kind of a really good place to grow up. And not that there weren't kind of issues and struggles, but it was it's a great place to kind of yeah percolate away growing up as a person. When I was a teenager, I was really kind of struggling. I have dyslexia, and so I was actually quite bright in my own kind of way, but really struggled with writing, which is ironic now. But I have a PhD. I've had 9 books published. But at that point, school was just torture. I went to Keysborough Technical School, which was kind of a school that were preparing us for trades, and there weren't many apprenticeships in the 80s that were becoming available. And so I remember 15, 16 trying to get an apprenticeship, being in one of those, really big halls of the Gas and Fuel Corporation, trying to get an apprenticeship. And there must have been 500 or 600 of us going for 3 apprenticeships. It was pretty grim stuff. And a lot of my friends were involved in drugs and alcohol and just that whole kind of world. So even I had a really healthy family life and church. I played football. The pagans, I think you call it soccer. I loved football. I loved the connection I kind of had back to where my parents were from as well. Represented my state as a schoolboy. Played semi-professional football in the end. But come 15, 16, it was one of those kind of moments. Do you throw yourself in with what your mates are doing? And lots of them ended up in jail and addictions and everything else that kind of went with all the gang and violent stuff that was happening in my school. Or if God is real, surely there's a lot more to faith and than I'm kind of seeing. It can't just be the Jesus I'm reading about and hearing about is nothing like the kind of churches I'm seeing. And so I kind of prayed a prayer, Lord, if you're real, make yourself real to me. If you're not, I'm just going to join and get as much fun out of my life as I possibly can with my mates. And yeah, one night I did go forward at a church meeting and had a real encounter of God. And it did feel like I was being filled with the Holy Spirit, and it was a physical kind of thing for me. And it did alter the trajectory of my life. And I wanted to throw myself fully in. I stood up at a Tony Campolo meeting. People might know Tony Campolo, Baptist sociologist, wisecracking kind of almost comedian style of preacher from the States. And I heard Tony speak as an 18-year-old. And I still remember him saying, you know, there's needs all around the world. If you want to be a teacher, there's places that don't have teachers. There's, you know, mate, what are you going to do with your life? You know, a lot of you are just will end up with the house and the car and the whole catastrophe, but you won't have lived your life. You know, why don't you give your life to Christ? Go anywhere for the cause of Christ, for the sake of the kingdom of God coming and seeing flourishing and God's peace coming to people. And I stood up at a kind of those kind of evangelical kind of moments to go anywhere for the cause of Christ. I met Angie, who was also at that meeting 6 months later. We were both 18-year-olds then, and we fell madly in love. Little did I know that Angie had also stood up at that meeting, and she thought she was going to Haiti. I thought I was going to China. And in the end, as I say, we got married as 20-year-olds. We started initially, we got some good advice. You know, why don't you start at your own backyard? And so we started working with Youth for Christ in prisons and youth detention centers. And that was kind of all, we were all living in Dingley at that point. But I just kind of knew there was a bigger world for us, and that bigger world suddenly opened up in a place called Springvale, which is our kind of first relocation. It wasn't far from Dingley, but it was a world away. It was where it was majority refugee neighborhood, big Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian, lots of folks after the Vietnam War who were refugees came across, and that's where they ended up. There was a big kind of resettlement center there. And so we started working there, partly because we had this kind of image in those days that it was really hard. Once kids are in the prison system and they're 15, 16, and then there, it's really difficult. Could we be like a fence at the top of the cliff? And rather than picking people up like an ambulance at the bottom, could we build a fence at the top to prevent people, young people particularly, falling in? Could we go back to the communities where they were coming from? Could we strengthen those communities and families? Could we see change happen in a preventative kind of way, rather than picking people up off the floor once they've hit rock bottom? And so Springvale was the place we ended up in. There was a poem, actually, Lao Tzu, who's a Chinese philosopher. He said, "Go to the people, live with them, learn from them, love them. Start with what they know, build with what they have. But with the best leaders, when the work is done, the task accomplished, the people will say, we've done it ourselves." And that was very much our approach, using what was strong in the local community to fix what was wrong. And churches got started, and we got involved with East Timorese asylum seekers and Burmese refugees, and helped start a number of churches owned and run by local people, as well as English classes. We helped, people may remember the East Timorese story, that lots of Timorese, after the Dili massacre, came to Australia. There were 1,650 who were facing deportation back to occupied Timor, and we were part of the kind of resistance to that. What's called the Sanctuary Network. I was on the committee, and we basically said, the government tries to deport them back to occupied Timor, we'll hide them in our homes. It was a 6 months jail sentence, and we had quite confrontations with the Minister Ruddock at the time, but we're really committed to our friends and neighbours who were Timorese. In the end, that was kind of, it was enough to back down. We didn't need to do that. All 1,650 got permanent residency after 10 years. And it was a big part of our lives, those connections with Burmese, with East Timorese, with Cambodians, Vietnamese. And so Springvale was kind of our second. We started Urban Neighbours of Hope to help other people relocate into neighbourhoods. And in 2002, I left Australia. I have not lived in Australia since 2002, to a big slum in Bangkok. Originally, we thought Ange and I would kind of pick up this dream we had since we were teenagers and go to Vietnam. The doors kind of closed in all kinds of ways, not least with visas, even though we had lots of contacts there. We had a sabbatical due in 1999, and we didn't quite know where to do it. We knew we wanted to go to the majority world somewhere. And my friend was at the Australian Embassy, my friend from Dingley, Mick Pilbrow. And Mick said, oh, why don't you come here to Bangkok? I'm at the embassy here. We've got great slums here in Bangkok. You'll love them. And so we did. It was we went for initially for a sabbatical there. I wrote my first book there, and got connected with teaching football and English. And Ange worked at an AIDS hospice. It was really moving, and we could see how our approach of using what people had in their hands could work in Klong Toi as well as it did in Springvale and the other places that was working in. By that time, it was also Sydney. It ended up being Wellington and Auckland, as well as the Thai Burma border. But at that point, we were the first kind of ones outside of Melbourne. And so, yes, in 2002, we were invited by the Church of Christ in Thailand to come and work at a community centre in Klong Toi. Klong Toi was, our third relocation and place that chose us. It was a slum of 100,000 people in a square mile. And you couldn't just try and fix needs there. There was no way anyone could be a messiah in that place. You had to work with what was in people's hands. One of my neighbours, her name was Pooh, and she was brilliant at cooking, and she'd cook out the front of her house. People would have the best food. Friends that visited from Australia said, this is better than any of the meals we have at any of the posh restaurants in Bangkok. Pooh's food is amazing. Unfortunately, the price of rice suddenly went through the roof when the government took subsidies off, and Pooh couldn't make money from her little stall out the front of her house, and people's wages didn't go up. And so food prices just shot up, and she was losing money on every plate and getting into debt. When you get into debt to a place like Klong Toi, you get into debt to some really dangerous people. And I remember Pooh coming and crying and talking with Ange and saying, look, is there some way, you can help us get out of this debt? Is there a job I could do with some of your Farang, some of your Westerner friends? I'll do anything, but I've got my two sons and my husband, and we're just in trouble. Ange has a real talent at detecting joy and what people are good at and what they're strong at. And she said to people, why don't you start a cooking school for tourists? You'll be able to make a lot more money from that. You'll use your skills and what you're really good at. And Pooh kind of initially said, no, it's a bit, I don't have English. I don't know how to do it. But we had some friends from Australia visit, and Pooh took them to the local market. And the markets in Bangkok are crazy. I mean, there's, you have cockroaches that you can eat, and they're all fried up, and frogs with their stomachs cut open, the hearts are still beating. People were kind of freaked out by this amazing kind of crazy market. And then she took them back to her house, and she was just a natural at teaching people how to cook. And within 6 months, it became the #1 thing to do on TripAdvisor in Bangkok. #2 was the Grand Palace. And then she did a cookbook, and Ange helped her with that. They got all the recipes together, brilliant photographs, stories of the local community as well. And her cookbook, Cooking with Pooh, has now sold 50,000 copies, and she cooks with Jamie Oliver. She won an award at the Frankfurt Book Fair, the biggest book fair in the world. She won an award for the oddest book title of the year, and comedians all around the world picked up, including Andrew Denton in Australia, Jonathan Ross over here, and she cooked with Jamie Oliver. If you look up Jamie Oliver and Cooking with Pooh, you'll see Jamie being taught how to do a massaman curry, and you'll see Jamie with an apron that said, "I cooked with Pooh and I liked it." And so it was a lot of fun with all that, but it was a really challenging place. It was amazing. The churches got started, the enterprises that got started, the community center we started at, became a preschool, and we ran football, all kinds of things got going, all run by local people. And then 2012, I did my rites of passage, and I did it in Perth in Scotland. And I'd known Richard Raw. He'd come to speak at our conference, Surrender Conference in Melbourne. and quite a few of our folks had done the rites of passage. It was and it was really moving. Lots of our kind of younger men who, quite frankly, were struggling with kind of maturity issues, really kind of grew up. And I'd read lots of the books, and we were using those 5 promises, that life is hard and you're going to die and all those kind of things. You're not the center of the world. You're not the center of life. Yeah, but those kinds of things. So we were using those a lot in Urban Neighbours of Hope. By that point, we had about 80 workers in 9 teams, 5 cities. Surrender Conference was getting 1,000 people a year at that. We had a training arm with the University of Divinity, MCD it was known then, and a publishing arm that was publishing a couple of 2 or 3 books a year. So it wasn't a big multi organization, but it was a big one for me. And by 2012, we'd lived in Klong Toi for over a decade by that point. I'd led Urban Neighbours of Hope for over 20 years at that point. And doing my rights was just a really good thing I was planning to do. With my daughter. My daughter had a really tough time. She was 5 when we went to Klong Toi, and she was about 15 then. And my son was born in Klong Toi, and so he was at primary school, and so it was a good time to kind of take a assessment. What will my second half of my life look like? And so I did the rights. I don't want to spoil it for people who have done it, but there was one day, the day of grief, which really was important for me. It was, I just didn't realize how much grief I'd accumulated, actually. I think one of the things about leading an organization, we started, when I was 22, 23, and I was, in my early 40s, 42, maybe 43, something like that. And I think when you're leading things so young, you often you have to be the kind of mature one. You have to kind of absorb all the pain that other people have and kind of get on with it. And I think I didn't realize how much grief and disappointment and pain I'd absorbed and just kind of carried until that day of grief, and it all just came out in a wail, really, and in pain and in very physically. I think that's the rights for me were really important. That a lot of my stuff was happening in my head, but actually the rights were much more about what was happening physically and then touching our hearts and then somehow making some sense of it at the end. And even then, it just kind of lived with you. And so it was a brilliant way of learning that I really connected with. But it was a really profound kind of moment. And I realized probably then that my time in Klong Toi was coming to an end, and my time with Urban Neighbours of Hope, I'd taken it as far as I could. But I wasn't even quite conscious of that. It was opening up this second half of life, what I wanted to do with sorry, Paul, I'm just rattling on, mate. But just to give it
keep going, mate. You're flying. Keep going. Doing great.
The 4th relocation was to Birmingham, and it did kind of come out of the blue in lots of ways. We were invited for Urban Neighbours of Hope to start a team in the UK. We had lots of Church of Christ contacts here in Birmingham. And I went visiting with some of the folks who were discerning about it. And I thought, whoa, if I had another life, this is where I'd love to do it. This is where I'd love to be. It's really central. It's accessible. It's a challenge, but there's huge opportunities in these really diverse, big post-industrial cities like Birmingham. And I think because my ancestors are from here, my mum and dad are from Britain, I just felt my DNA kind of come alive here in a strange kind of way. And I felt really drawn here. And so when we were thinking about what was next after Urban Neighbours of Hope and what was next after Klong Toi, I kind of hesitantly said, look, I would love to do Birmingham if there's any way of doing it. And didn't expect Anne to be up because she loved Klong Toi. It's fair to say I struggled in Klong Toi. uh, we always talk about the story of Jonah in men's work, don't we? And certainly uh, for Ange and I, the kind of rhythm of the ideal that Jonah had about himself and as a prophet and what he would do. And we kind of had some ideals about ourselves. And you've got to have those ideals to get out there, don't you? And have a shot at things. But there's nearly always an ordeal. Jonah ends up in the belly of the fish, doesn't he? And certainly in Bangkok, my first few years, I nearly died a few times with typhoid, typhus, dengue fever 4 times. I struggled with the language. I struggled with the conditions. But Ange was like a duck to water. She loved it. It was tough for her as well, but she really, in her language, found her skin. And after a while, actually, there's the ideal, there's the ordeal, but there can be a new deal. There can be a kind of resurrection. And for quite a few years, we kind of both found our way, but it was never home in the same way that I thought I would always live there, in the same way for Ange. And so the opportunity to go to Birmingham to start again was important. Paul, can I just read a little bit out of the book about this and then
Sure.
hand it to you? Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good.
Um,
Just for a bit of context, so this is your new book, which is No Wastelands, isn't it? That you're talking about. This has just been released earlier this year, and it's growing seed beds of shalom in your community. I probably butchered your subtitle there, mate. Sorry.
and that's fine. Yeah, No Wastelands, How to Grow Seedbeds of Shalom in Your Neighborhood. And I'm thrilled you're getting Brian McLaren in as well. He did the forward to this, and Richard Rawl was kind enough to do an endorsement as well, and Campolo and lots of those heroes of Vine, which was good. So this is just part of the introduction, and this is a section that's called Winson Green as a Seedbed of Shalom, question mark. I was in a bustling, humid food court in Kuala Lumpur in 2014 when I first heard seedbeds used as a metaphor for our ministry. Dr. John Perkins, the famous civil rights leader, author, and founder of the Christian Community Development Association in the USA, met up with a few of us organizers between sessions of the International Society for Urban Mission Summit. He was so inspirational, sharing honestly about growing up in poverty in Mississippi and the tragic, preventable deaths of his mother and brother. It was a time of huge transitions for me. And while moved by Dr. Perkins, I was also preoccupied with my own future. Not only had I just moved out of Klong Toi slum in Bangkok, Thailand, that had been our home for 12 years, but I was also leading Urban Neighbours of Hope, the organization I had founded and led since I was 22 years old. I was now 45 and preparing to start again with very little left in my hands. Dr. Perkins suddenly turned, looked to me and asked, "So why will you move to Birmingham, England?" I gulped and felt my face getting even redder. How could I explain this craziness in a way that made sense quickly and without embarrassing myself in front of a living legend and peers? I took a deep breath and blurted out something like, "In the second half of my life, I want to invest my best energies in local leaders and their communities. We need to find out what is possible ourselves in a particular place, but also see a new generation go further than we could. I want to live in a world where local communities decide their own futures and grow their own leaders. I think that if I can start that anew planted in Winson Green, then we can be available and accessible to support long-term change in cities and nations around the world too." I then held my breath and shut up. It went quiet on our table as the buzz of the food court seemed to grow louder. Dr. Perkins slowly looked up at me, and then he grew animated. "I know what you're trying to do. You want to grow seed beds. You want to offer fertile soil and nutrients and water and help new shoots grow up that wouldn't normally do that. You want to see more fruit grow in unexpected places. Some seedlings may get replanted someplace else and they can grow there in new ways they couldn't before, but you want to grow seed beds." He was right. 4 months after this encounter, we moved as a family to Winson Green, an inner city region of Birmingham, UK. We left with just a few bags and little money, but I had this deep sense of call to start a seed beds there. We needed this dream. Those first few years buried us alive. Dr. Perkins' dream for us of planting seed beds that could nurture local leaders into God's shalom kept reoccurring. We and our seed bed were being planted. As I write this, I'm conscious that Dr. Perkins' metaphor was a kind of prophecy for me. Not only has Winson Green experienced deep change through local leaders from within, but we now support diverse community leadership programs with participants from 5 cities in England, as well as Scotland, Ukraine, Myanmar, and Australia. Primarily, we do this through an organisation we started, eventually named Seedbeds. Informally too, through our Seedbeds communications, our book, speaking, and media work has inspired and informed many more in their attempts. This book is part of that fruit, and all proceeds from the sale of this book will go back into the Seedbeds venture. We want to keep growing seedbeds wherever we can. We want to see places some consider wastelands renewed, become like seedbeds of shalom. Will you join us? Prepare to be buried. And certainly the next section is about, we weren't really buried, we were planted for such a time as this.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Ash. Thanks for reading that really inspiring part of the first bit of your book. It'd be great to hear a little bit about your work in Birmingham and what has been happening. And I'm happy to go to the video now. Would you like to see it first and talk, or talk first and then see it?
The video is good. And this is a video that my son was involved in doing, and Newbigin Community Trust is the name of our local charity that we got started with local people here as a way of really really discovering talents that people have, connecting people together, and then releasing them in their, just like we were doing with Pooh in Clongtoy, in Winson Green. We've been able to do that with individuals. There is a kind of multi-level flourishing that's happening, and Newbigin Community Trust, which Ange leads, has been an important part of that.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Ash. All right, I'll show the video, and that will hopefully, share sound, optimize. All right, I'll just.
So, I don't know if you've ever heard of Winson Green in Birmingham. It's an inner city concrete jungle with a huge Victorian prison. You may have seen it on Channel 4's infamous show, Benefit Street. But with over 6,000 people per square kilometre, representing over 25 ethnicities and even more languages, we call it home. It's one of the most diverse areas in the district, with 76.2% of the population made up of ethnic minorities, and right at the heart of this vibrant neighbourhood is Newbigin Community Trust. We are an asset-based organisation which seeks to provide a place of welcome, inclusion and social cohesion for our neighbours here in Winson Green and the surrounding community. Most of our staff and volunteers live within the community because we are passionate about seeing our community transformed. Our neighbourhood is full to the brim of untapped potential and beautiful talent waiting to be discovered and released. Newbigin Community Trust runs numerous projects and events, often instigated by the very members of our community to help discover and develop skills in our constantly changing neighbourhood. Our approach is that no project is too big or small, whether it's taking on fun, noisy kids clubs or women's advocacy hubs. Introducing our alpacas to our neighbours or helping neighbours access the care they need, even if it means a 3 a.m. hospital visit. Projects range from arts to music to urban gardens, or even a daily community cafe for when you need a coffee and a bite to eat. We love making any dream a reality. Some things are one-off ways of supporting our neighbours, and others are sustainable projects that run for months. Either way, we are a flexible organisation that responds to the needs and dreams of our community. Newbigin Community Trust is powered by the people of Winson Green to help see the community and its people transformed and realise their value, their worth and their absolute immense potential.
Yeah, beautiful. It's awesome seeing that video again, and I had the pleasure of spending a fair bit of time with Ash and Ange in Birmingham with that community, getting to know lots of those wonderful people that you see in that video. Ash, it would be really great if you could just talk a bit about what that place and the sense of place that you've had with with the Winstone Green community. What has that been for you and for the community, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we love it here, and we certainly feel like we're part of the neighborhood. And again, that kind of ideal ordeal, New Deal happened again. None of our plans survived impact. And what I thought I was going to do with a college, setting up a center for urban ministry, and Andrew was going to be based at a local school that was being taken up by Oasis Trust, just didn't work. Like the Church of England said, we've got this manse, you could take a month before we left. That fell through as well. So it's probably a year in, we thought, what on earth are we doing here? How can we see this place become a seedbed of shalom? Shalom means God, people, and place living in harmony together. How can we see that kind of flourishing happen? We had a kind of idea that really what we wanted to do was become, this is the words of the new parish, they talk about a patch that you belong to. It's big enough to live a lot of life in, but small enough to become a known character, the unfolding drama of that place. And so we got a couple of alpacas very early on, and walked them from our house to the local school where Andrew was based initially, and we just got to know lots and lots of people. And over time, those connections, became discoveries of what people were good at, what they could see happen. But we also wanted to take seriously the physical nature of the neighborhood and what assets were there. There was one park, for example, called Black Patch Park. An amazing history, actually. It was right next to James Watt, who first manufactured the steam engine. His first attempt at that happened just near Black Patch Park. And there was Charlie Chaplin, the famous black and white movie star, was allegedly born on Black Patch Park in a gypsy caravan. And so all these kind of amazing things had kind of happened here. The name Leslie Newbigin may be familiar to some of you. He was a great theologian, mission writer of the 20th century in India primarily. He was English, but he came back to England in the 1980s and wrote books like Gospel and Plural Society, Foolishness to the Greeks, Open Secret. He wrote those in Winstone Green. And so hence when we're trying to build on what's strong in a community, the name Newbigin was one. And then we reclaimed the local manse vicarage that hadn't been used for decades. We renamed that Newbigin House, and Leslie's son actually came along, and the Bishop of Birmingham and BBC came. We had all these animals. It was packed with all the local community that we knew then. We moved into that place itself, but I still remember John Newbigin saying, my dad didn't really want to come to Winstone Green. They were going to close the church down and sell off the building. And my dad just said, the church can't withdraw from the inner city. I'll go myself if I need to. He was in his 70s by that point. And they said, well, go on then, away you go. And actually he wrote his best material there. And but John Newbigin said, look, Dad didn't want to go, but you know what? I think as I look around today, he'd feel vindicated by what's going on today. And so yeah, it was so we live in Newbigin House, which is the old vicarage, up to 9 of us. Paul and Lizzie have stayed there at different times. We've often had all kinds of animals there. We've got a yurt in the front where we do our men's work and our we've got choir, all kinds of things. Anyone that has an idea that they feel strongly enough about to do something about, we try and work with them to do it. We also, where I am today is Lodge Road Community Church. This was a derelict building when we took it over 3 years. The park, Black Patch Park, was just covered in old tires that had been dumped. They'd become a rubbish tip illegally. And the council just wouldn't do anything about it. But we band together, we joined local Friends of Black Patch Park group and got it and some of the bit around the park we got rezoned. Today, that's a brand new school, £26 million project that just opened in September. And we were able to get a brand new high school, much needed, and a state-of-the-art facility. We've been campaigning for housing. And so we're waiting for any day now that Ron, who's a local developer, he initially wanted to build 2 big tower blocks with 1-bedroom flats. And we said, we really need family homes. And we tried to block the agreement for the council for that to go ahead. We failed. We had 14 different community groups protesting against it. Eventually, the council agreed 9-4 that they would go ahead with it. But Ron made contact with us, and we kind of won him over. And he's become a good friend of ours. He was willing to come down and talk to people and families about their housing needs. He introduced us to his architect, and we came up with some great plans. And so there'll be 420 apartments there now. 100 of them the Church of England are buying for affordable homes. There'll also be a supermarket, a healthcare clinic, a civic square, and a park for the kids to play in. And so that kind of dream of being a seedbed of shalom, where God, people, and place living in harmony together, is really happening. Newbigin Community Trust is based in 4 locations now. Newbigin House, as I mentioned, they've blacksmithing. They beat knives that have been confiscated by the police and make them into flowers. And we've got brilliant blacksmiths who do that now. Local people who are trained up to do it, as well as kids club, youth club, all kinds of things there. It's all run by local people. So we haven't started, we haven't gone, there needs to be blacksmithing. The people who are interested in blacksmithing, and we found a way for that to kind of work. And then, so in the 2 high school and a primary school, as well as Lodge Road and Newbigin House, we've started 2 new congregations, one here at Lodge Road, one which is a bit more informal and adults only, for safeguarding reasons at Newbigin House. They have a meal together. And so it's all really informal, but really participatory. That dream of being a seedbed of shalom is really happening. And because we've been able to be a base here, we've also been able to support work in Myanmar and Ukraine and East London. We go to Scotland this afternoon we've had change makers there, and we've got book launches up there as well as taster days. And then, so lots happening. The Ukraine thing, a friend of mine actually thinks I'm a bit like the anti-Forrest Gump. So what do you mean? Well, Forrest Gump shows up and he ends up in these world-changing kind of events. You show up and disaster happens. I mean, you go to Thailand and, the tsunami happens and 2 coups d'etats happen. You go to England and 250,000 people die of COVID and Brexit happens. You get involved in Ukraine for a master's program to help set that up in Kiev, and 18 months later, Russia invades. I'm not saying, I'm responsible for all these things, but I'm just saying to you today, be very careful after listening to me, what you're driving home or what you're doing this afternoon.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Ash. That's it's a scary moment. No, it's amazing your sense of what transformation can look like in a community when people are kind of empowered to get to find their gifts and their place, and I suppose it's quite amazing what you're doing. I suppose for everyday people like us here, I don't want people to think, oh, you can't. It's only heroes like you and Ange that can do this work. What would you say to somebody who is thinking about what can I do in my local community to be a part of transformation or seeing things change? Where would you start there?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a Christian minister, so I do talk about call a lot. So, but there is a sense of being called to a place, and where are you called to be? What is your patch? Leslie Newbigin once said the role of the local church is to be a sign, a foretaste, and an instrument of God's coming kingdom in a place for which it is responsible. And so I think there is this sense of calling to be responsible for a place. And it starts with that for me, can't shake it. Winson Green's part of me, I'm part of it. What happens here matters. If bad things happen here, I'm part of being responsible for putting things to right. And so I think it starts with that. I think the second thing is you can't do everything. And so you have to, I think most people have to let go of things to be able to focus on what matters. And one of I loved your poem, that the David White poem, and I love the Camino. I've done 2 different versions of it. We do lots of pilgrimages here. We take people out to St Cuthbert's Way, and we walk from Melrose in the Scottish borderlands down to Holy Island. I love taking our folk away on these pilgrimages. But when I had a sabbatical last year, and Paul, you sent me that poem, and it meant so much to me as I went into Santiago, and then even more so to Finisterre, which is kind of the so-called end of the world that the ancients believed it was. I really felt I had to narrow my scope down to what are 5 things that are really important to me. I can't do everything. I'd heard, I can't remember who said this, but someone said, what do you want to do with your life? And do you want to keep doing this, what you're doing for me? And he said, no, I've got lots of things. Well, tell me 20 things you want to do by the end of your life. And so he came out with 20 really quickly. And he said, well, what are the top 5? And so he identified the top 5. What do I do with those other 15? Do I just kind of just slowly work away at them? He said, no, don't do the other 15. They're like kryptonite for you. You've got to focus on those 5 and put all your energies into those. And once you've done one of those 5, you can then look at those other ones. And so I really felt on my pilgrimage, the Camino I did, the initial one I did was the Portuguese one. You go from starting in Porto. Anne's joined me for part of it. And then I went up along the Atlantic coast. I cut in a bit, ends up in Santiago de Compostela. What were my top 5? And I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but I really sensed by the time I got there, I had a sense of what were the things I needed to let go of, get out of, and hand on to other people, and what were the core kind of essential things that I'd really kick myself if I didn't do these things. So one of them was, the renewal of Winson Green, and that takes on lots of forms. The other was internationalizing seedbeds. And actually, I was out in Australia recently, and part of that was helping Seedbeds Australia get going with some of our local changemaker programs. They'll be piloting that this year. I had a sense for pioneers, people who were starting new initiatives that I really wanted to give some attention there. This last weekend, we had pioneers away. The United Reformed Church are actually paying us now to run those programs. I had a sense I wanted pilgrimage to be a big part of my life, and so I've been able to. Last year I was able to do quite a few pilgrimages, including the St. Francis Way in Italy, the St. Cuthbert's Way I did twice. I did 2 various versions of Camino. For me, it's that keeping that vitality inside and out. It's physical. At my age, I've got to look after my body a lot better than I had been. I was conscious that blood pressure was up. I was very static. And so pilgrimages are good for my health, my physical health, but it's also really good for my mental health and my spiritual health as well. And so I really wanted to make that a core part. And the other bit was, to finish this bloody book and get it out. And so that's been launched this year. And so I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but I think most people, we think we can do more than we can. And we think we can be everything to everybody. And I think part of what is the gift that I've got to offer? What are the things I need to pay attention to? What do I let go of? So and what is it I take up? They're really crucial, because yeah, you just because you live in a neighborhood doesn't mean you're a proper neighbor. And so I think all of us can be neighbors. One of the things I'm going to encourage people to do is don't work full time. Try and live more simply, and give one day of work to your neighborhood, and just join in with what's going on. I mean, if you join your local political party, for example, you turn up every week and you do what you say you're going to do, and you help people out, you'll be the most valued member of that branch, and have amazing kind of say in what happens. And so I think creating space and time and focus is a really important part of making a difference. I get a kind of routine together, and so I make sure that those things happen. So I'm one of those people who get up at 6 a.m. and prepare my day for a couple of hours before I start. I try and work out what I'm grateful for from the day before, and then what are 3 things that I need to really pay attention to today, and if it would be a great day if these 3 things happen. So one of the things today is meeting with you and hoping that I can add value to your lives. There's some ideas anyway.
Ash, that's so helpful. Those suggestions to start local and create time and space and get involved where you are, and pay attention. I think that real kind of willingness to kind of open your eyes and see what's happening in your community, and how you can be someone who owns it, like that kind of ownership of your place as a way of getting involved, having the weight and the significance of the local space kind of hold you and mean that you want to see its flourishing, you want to see it its success, or you care about when things aren't working. I think that paying attention really is a really huge thing that you're talking about there. Thanks so much, mate. And there's so much more that we could touch on in terms of your adventures in your life and the work that you've done, the lessons that you've learned. But is there one final thought before we divide up into some groups, just to kind of think and reflect a little bit on your what you've been talking about? Is there one thing that you want to maybe leave us with?
One of my favorite quotes is Viktor Frankl. He's a Holocaust survivor, wrote the book In Search of Meaning. He said, "We detect rather than invent our missions in life." And I think that detection process, that willingness to what gives us life, what is it that's giving us energy and vitality, where are we being useful? Those things are worth paying attention to. But also, what are those things that are taking life from us? And how can we respond to those? And so I think those pains in our lives can be focused into passion and change. But some of these things that are not, we don't just kind of make them up out of thin air. And when we try to be someone that we're not, that's the struggle. And so so I think that's what I want to leave you with. We detect rather than invent our missions in life.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks so much, mate. I'll just finish the recording there, and then I'll explain what's happening next. Thanks.